pleasure in meeting you in February. And it is always a pleasure when a seeker gets to share his knowledge. And to have someone who resonates with us, practical realities, who has observations on the Indian way of life amidst all this chaos and confusion, it gives us great pleasure. And it is a bonus indeed to have you with us. The speaker for the day, Steve Correa. He is a commerce and a law graduate from XLRA and a Chevening scholar. He currently works as an independent executive coach and an OD consultant and is a fellow of Sumedha's Academy for Human Context. With over 3 decades of corporate experience, 18 years of this has been as a CHRO with overall responsibility for the HR function, and he has worked across a wide spectrum of enterprises. He has diverse industry exposure that includes pharmaceuticals, office automation, FMCG, telecommunications, IT, ITES, and alcohol beverage. His exposure spans across India as well as abroad. Who better for somebody who has seen such a wide variety of industries to talk to us what it is that gives us the Indian leadership styles and the way of working. Steve, the platform is all yours for the day, and welcome once again from NHRD Chennai chapter.
Thank you, Anu. Thank you for the generous introduction. Thanks very much, Ganga Priya, for inviting me, Avinash, for helping with the technical end of this webinar, and to NHRD Chennai, and to all of you who've taken time after a long day at work to spend 90 minutes with me on a very important topic, which is discovering Indian-Ness and discovering the Indian leader. So in terms of the format, I'm going to spend the first 50, 60 minutes in sharing a couple of slides and leave a large portion of the last 30 minutes for question and answers. But in the first 60 minutes, we are going to engage with each other using the chat. The couple of questions that I have for you, and we will chat using the chat box. So if without any much ado, let me begin. If I could just have all of you bring all your attention to the diya and the mandala, and whenever you feel comfortable, just gently close your eyes and take a deep breath and bring all your attention to your breathing in, and just observe the breath in and the breath leaving your body. And the deeper you breathe, the more relaxed you are. And bring all your attention to this moment with the commitment, the sankalp, that you will bring all your attention over the next 90 minutes to discovering Indian-Ness and the Indian leader. And whenever you're comfortable, please open your eyes. As you know, the diya signifies purity, goodness, good luck, power, and it really is about the presence of life leading to a non-existence of darkness. And the mandala is a kind of a connection around connecting us with the larger holistic aspects of ourself with that of the universe. So while I refer to my book, this conversation is more about looking at the aspects of Indianness and the specifically to the Indian leader. Now, one of the things that you probably need to understand is, unlike the Western notion that there is for us in India, leadership is a continuous discovery, a journey, a quest. It's an inquiry and a scientific inquiry into anivikshi, and it brings in the whole aspect of how to think and discipline. And Indic wisdom would like us to affirm that leadership is all about being in the midst of questions, not answers, and continuing to move on in the continuous quest in terms of discovery. Having said that, let me start by sharing with you my own journey into how I traversed on discovering Indianness and the Indian leader. It was in November 2011. It was at an NHRD conference in Bangalore. A global speaker was sharing his perspectives on a leadership practice, and someone in the audience, like you, raised his hand and remarked that we too should have our own indigenous model to use that indigenous model of leadership in the organization. And several speakers, they all chimed in at once, agreeing with this person, saying, yes, we should be following our own Indian way of leadership. The global speaker then requested if someone could come on stage and elaborate on an Indian way of working. And then suddenly there was an awkward silence. Someone finally gets up, goes to the stage, says a few things. I don't remember whether it was about Chanakya or something, and returns. At that moment, I experienced, as they say, a moment of epiphany. I realized then that my own knowledge of Indian leadership practice was unsatisfactory. And in discussions with others, over tea, over the next week, over the next month, I discovered that for most of us, our foundational knowledge of Indianness is woefully inadequate. Yet we follow it unconsciously. But beyond surface understanding, some reading, and some intuition, there has certainly not been much attention given to it and its application in the workplace. And the question for all of us, HR folks, is what kind of training do we provide our leaders when they enter the workplace, say from MBA institutes, or when employees grow in the workplace? How well do we understand the context, the Indianness, and the contextual cultural codes? For what no one tells you is that leadership is an art and a craft, but in between lies business. And I am convinced that the ABC of leadership has to be taught. So I went then snorkeling, as in a metaphor, and jumped into this vast ocean of Indianness. And there below I saw and read and understood a large reservoir of wisdom that has existed for over 7,000 years and more. Unlike most civilizations like the Aztec, the Mesopotamia, Egyptian, and so on and so forth, Incas, the Indian civilization is the oldest living civilization with continuity of today. And I wondered if our own hoary past, which includes cosmic collectivism, tolerance, harmony, co-holding differences, acceptance and adaptability, jugaad, spiritual quotient, duties to self, duties to others, kul, ethics, ecological balance, and hierarchical order, and of course, regional collectivism. Do all of these lend itself, offer answers to modern day leadership practice? So I then went on to look at two aspects, which I'll call ethic and emic. Ethic is outside in, which is looking at the lens of India using global tools like Hosted, Trump and Globe studies, which divide the world in, let's say, pairs, masculine, feminine, power distance. So I studied tools which are ethic of a looking at from a ethnocentric lens. And then I used tools that come from an indigenous lens, which I call the emic lens. But not satisfied with just the ethic and the emic, the inside out and the outside in, I wondered if, apart from my own experience of 30 plus years working in leadership, 18 plus years I've been a CHRO myself, worked both in India and abroad, worked across industries. I wondered if I represented today's senior leaders at the workplace. Or was Indian wisdom encrusted wisdom, which has no praxis in today's contemporaneous times? Are they gems, but locked in a showcase? Or are they living praxis? And therefore, I went looking to interview leaders, as you have seen in this chart, and other leaders as well. And in the book, in the spotlight section, when you hear Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw talk about Thakur, or you talk to somebody like Rajiv Memani from EY or others, it becomes very apparent and very clear that the Indian-Ness, as identified through the multiple aspects, is a living aspect of who we are. And the question that therefore is, my friends, why is it so important for us to understand Indian-Ness in the way that I explain it? And one of the ways to explain this perhaps is to say that imagine you are watching Shakespeare's Hamlet, the play in NCPA Mumbai. The audience is Indian, the actors are Indian, the stage is Indian, the actor is saying to be or not to be, but yet the entire background is an indigenous setup, but in the foreground is an English play. And in today's postmodern world with Western influences, that is the foreground in which we are playing. but with an orientation which is 7,000 years of Kal, Desha, and Patra. And therefore, there are two juxtaposed processes that are simultaneously in play. And these two processes are actually inside you that continue to act and continue to leverage itself. So, over these talk, what would I like for you to think, feel, and act? I'd like you to think about Indian-Ness and the Indian leader. I'd like you to feel proud of being part of a 7,000-year-old culture. And one of the actions I'd like you to certainly take is to discover your own personal leadership style. Now, in listening to me, there is a particular way of listening that I would urge you. A listening that requires listening to my words, Shravana, but linking it with your own experience of having lived and your own experiences of working, living in society, Manana, of contemplation with your own lived experience. And a deeper contemplation, Nidhi Dhyasana, which is, I would say, a focus, penetration of what we are engaging with. Very similar to the yoga last three limbs of Dhyan, Dharana, and Samadhi. And it is this synoptical level of engagement is what I would like for you to engage yourself with in this talk. Because that is the nature of the difference between a Western way of gaining insights with an Indic way of realization, which is the basis of our own discovery. In our talk, I'm going to cover three ideas. The idea of the East and West, the idea of Indian-Ness, and the facets of the Indian leader. These are three topics that I'm going to cover. And I'll start with the first of East and West. And I just want to be very clear that East and West is not Turkey and to the west of it or the east of Turkey onwards. I mean, East and West are approaches, mental processes, orientations, a way of looking which exists inside each one of you. Inside each one of you. But before we begin, I'd like you to, on the chat box, type either capital D, Delhi, D, or capital L. Using your own experience of living, do you believe that human beings across the world are similar or distinctive? Please begin your chat. Type D or S. So I don't know, Anu, what would you say, Avinash, is the number of Ds and S?
I think the Ds have it with just only two S's.
Okay, so there is a view that human beings are distinctive. Well, I think the answer, according to me, in my own understanding, is that the imperatives and the dilemmas and challenges that people face across the world universally are similar. I repeat, the imperatives, challenges, and dilemmas that people face universally are similar. But the way societies or nations or people in groups respond to those dilemmas, challenges are cultural. The response is cultural, but the issues are universal. So when we talk about leadership, these are universal imperatives, challenges, but the response to how leaders behave are actually cultural and dependent on Kal, Desh, and Patra. In the next picture, you will see, and it helps me to refer to a German philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer, who made the case that if you look at the world, you can roughly split it into two kinds of people. So he uses the example of the hedgehogs in a chilly night coming together for warmth, and they come and stick to each other, hoping to get some warmth by sticking to each other. But the more they stick, there's also the pain that comes from too much of close contact. And his argument was that some societies are more sticky or collectivist, and some societies prefer to keep a little distance, independence. And so the next question I have for you is, do you believe India is less sticky or more sticky? Please type in the chat box. L or M? Less sticky or more sticky? Absolutely. Absolutely. So there seems to be an overwhelming response that the Indian
People say that
society
it is more
is
sticky.
more sticky. And at the same time, someone did point out that it depends contextually. So the thing is that that's also correct. We are collectivists by and large, but we are also individualistic. So presenting an NHRD conference, we might say is good for the company, but actually it also gives us personal pleasure. Spending money during a wedding, um, we say it's on because of collectivism, but it also meets an individual need, etc., etc. So we say things like we're doing this for our family, but we also get personal gratification. So the reality is that the independence is subdued in support of and amplified with regards to the collectivists. In other words, Herbert Mead had said that there was an I, which is the self, and there's a me, which is the social self. And in India, the me, that I belong to this village, I'm from this caste, I'm from this religion, I'm from this society, I'm from this club. The me is amplified, and the I is slightly diminished in favor of the me. Now, if I were to just look at some broad differences between the East and West, and I'd like for you to think about yourself, because as I said earlier, we have both these orientations in our head, the Eastern orientation and the Western orientation. I'd like for you all to think about what is the leaning that you have towards one or the other. So let's begin. The Western orientation has this notion of one good life. that all Abrahamic religions have, that after you die, uh, there is the afterlife. You go to heaven, or there's a grace. Whereas in the Eastern notion, you come back till, of course, there is nirvana or moksha. So, what is your philosophy? Do you believe in one good life or many lives? Number two, the West has a very acute sense of I. So if you ask someone, Joe Blogs, tell me about yourself, you'll say, my CQPI is this. I am good in sports. I am known to be a team player. I. If on the other hand you talk to Ram Bahadur, he would turn around and say, I come from this Apna crowd. I'm from this village. I'm from this thing. He is constantly part of the we, and there's a focus on the we. The Western world is concerned with the social aspects and the physical aspects, and a belief that there has to be moderation between the self and society to create good citizenship. Otherwise, the natural aspects of human being will go into chaos at homes. In India, on the other hand, or in the Eastern mindset, there is this whole notion of the self, the social self, and the metaphysical self. So there are some societies that believe in planet movements, Vastu, wear different rings, and believe that whatever is happening and has a cause, and that's all connected with our purpose. And finally, uh, the Western orientation looks at extracting one piece, keeping everything else a control group, and looking at analytical perspectives, whereas the Eastern mindset tends to look at it holistically and in a more connected kind of a way. So, back on the chat, do you believe that you have more of a leaning to Eastern or Western or mixed 50-50? Please type in the chat. Do you believe your own mind is mixed, leaning towards one or the other? So clearly, most of you are calling out that, yes, I have both these orientations, and that's the correct answer, because we come from a 7,000 years Kal, Desh, and Patra, and we also live in a postmodern world, English speaking, which has been heavily entrenched with Western thinking. So obviously, we would be having two simultaneous processes operating. If there's one thing I want you to remember at the end of this talk, is that the effective leader is one, I repeat, the effective leader is one who is able to co-hold the Eastern and the Western orientation within. And if someone is not able to co-hold, becomes a Trishanku, that leader becomes fairly ineffective. And in my study, I've seen that many Indian leaders, both abroad and in India, are able to synthesize, co-hold, integrate these two aspects, while unfortunately a large number of leaders have a leaning towards one or the other and end up being challenged on their leadership style. So, East, as I said, is repeat of the Trimurti. It's a V world. Um, it's all about eliminating dukkha, not just looking for happiness, and holistic and connectedness. So that's the big difference between the East and West. And when I say East and West, not only do they exist inside our mind, and where there is this constantly this dharam sankata, but it can also play itself out between leaders. For example, Sikka and Ratan Tata, Sikka and Narayan Murthy, or Cyrus Mistry with Ratan Tata. Because again, there is a kind of a clash between orientations and culture. I'll stop here to take a pause. Anu, are there any questions that might have got generated around the first part, East and West? I'll take that now.
Nothing is there on the chat box. I would like to ask the participants if you have any question at this juncture.
Sir, this is Francis from Kuwait, and I'm really delighted to be here. You know, you are it's quite impressive what you're saying, you know. And the point which I'm highlighting, because I think Tamil Nadu, I think Chennai chapter is hosting. So in our culture, no, we have, when we go to a wedding, no, we used to sit and then, no, I need the sweet actually, no, I don't ask directly. I say, sir, please come. I need a sweet for my, next guy, So while serving the sweet, I may get also, So I don't ask directly, that's a reality actually.
True.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true, Francis, because we try and serve the collectivist interest. Give my friend, give my neighbor. And when he comes to serve them, the neighbor also understands. So he says, why don't you serve Francis as well? And then you get served. So it's about I scratching your back, you scratching my back. And it's all about collectivism in that sense. And it has different forms. I might want the best doctor in Chennai, the best specialist, but I always ask my friends and my family, because their social approval is also as important as getting the best doctor. So I cleverly combine collectivist approval with individualistic performance orientation in order to create the package. But thank you for that, Francis.
Thanks.
Let me continue with the idea of Indian-Ness. And let me start by asking all of you to type on your chat box. When you hear the term Indian-Ness, what are one word, two words, three words, a phrase that comes up for you? Your time begins now on the chat. What is Indian-Ness? Emotions, service to others, culture, the heart, the value system, sensitivity to people, sympathy, empathy, principles, values. Okay. Thank you for that. Compassion. So what is Indian-Ness? Like I told you, I researched people's looking at Indians from outside with ethnocentric. Ethnocentric is using one's own reference to see something out there, using one's own lens, one's own reference point. And EMIC is looking at the indigenous platform. And you have to understand that you have to look at indigenous psychology in order to fully understand India. Could you tell me why did the staff in the Taj Hotel not run away? If you read Western literature, they would all have, because of survival, they all would have escaped out of fear when the terrorists came and started shooting. So, what Indian cultural aspects cause for them to stay on and serve others? Somebody talked about service. Could it be that in our Indic culture, as somebody Anuradha is pointing out, Atithyo Devo Bhava, guest is God? And that's the correct answer, Anu, because if you look at the Harvard study and the movie that got made, absolutely, it talks about the value systems and the role of the staff members and many of the points that you guys wrote. You see, leadership principles, if you look at it from what we know today, has come mostly from the Second World War, mostly from North America, mostly from Europe, written by males, not women, written mostly by professors and academicians and consultants. And the research has been done on weird participants. Weird means W for Western, E for educated, I for industrialized, R for rich, and D for democratic. Weird participants, mostly college kids looking for pocket money. And the question I have for you is the rest of the world weird? Please go on mute. And today's workplace, because of the bias of strong masculine writing, does not represent the feminine, the Nari principles at the workplace. No wonder women find it so difficult. And even men, because many of the aspects of the feminine principles is not graced at the workplace. So what is it that I have tried to do in my book? I've tried to prove Rudyard Kipling wrong by saying, when he said the East and the West shall never meet, I am trying to integrate the Harvard with the Gurukul or the Rishi and create the Rajashri model of leadership. Because we need, especially in today's times, in the COVID times that we live in, we need a leadership that also borrows from the rich collectivism, ecological balance, harmony, and many aspects of the rich Indic wisdom that we have. And the world would be a greater place for that. And we need to integrate these two to bring about a level. So the problem sometimes with the leadership models of the West, and as you have learned it in your MBA institute, is that it talks about the seed. But if you throw your seeds, some may fall on the soil, some on the rock. And unless the seeds fall on the soil, and if the soil is not looked at, which is the Kala and the Desha, then how do you expect for the seed to grow into a sapling? And this seed, which is contextual, is what I am referring to as Indian-Ness. And in order to therefore understand how to lead, one needs to also use the seeds and also the soil. And therefore, the Indian leadership, which is thinking global and acting Indian, is about thinking globally, not about Western. Thinking global is about ecological and all the principles of the world as one family. Let everyone be happy. Let us not destroy, because we ourselves are the inheritors. Many such principles of ahimsa and so on. It is this that I refer to as thinking global and acting in a manner that is aligned to our own Kal and Desh. Now, many of you might say, if I act Indian, does it mean I'll be cut away from the world? Will I lose my edge? And the reality is, my friends, that you are in that Hamlet saying to be or not to be, and you are an Indian. I'm only making you conscious to own up your Indianness. And many of the leaders, including Indrani Nui and Satya Nadella and so on and so forth, they have brought their affiliative aspects, parivar, into workplaces and have actually amplified their Indianness. That has brought them the rich success that they have. Because in India, and there's this guy called Eric Fromm, there's a guy called Yuvari, who's written this book, Homo Deus and Sapient and so on. And many other people talk about social character. And in my book, I write about 15, 20 social characters, such as you keep your shoes out, you touch people's feet, you respect elders, you look after your family, etc., etc. And these social characters are the dominant ideas of our time. For example, two ideas which are universal, not Indian, universal, are that capitalism is good, that democracy is great. I'm now, which means if you believe in democracy, then you're saying things like, a king or a ruler or other forms of governance is not so great. Today, democracy is considered to be the flavor of the decade or of our times. So from time to time, there will be some social character, some dominant ideas. Few years from now, a few decades from now, taking one's own life, euthanasia, could be a practical idea. We today shudder to think about people being put on a cross and hanged till death. So we have social characters that come from our Desh and Kal and our times. And these are the social characters that influence the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we act. And as a result, my friends, we go through a lot of clash between the Eastern and the Western world. We go through a lot of clash between East, West, what I call the Dharam Sankatas, but the English words are the polarities, the contradictions, the dilemmas, the paradoxes. And let me give an example. In COVID times, do I fire 500 people? Or do I reduce the salary by 30, 40%? Do I focus on livelihood or do I focus on lives and on P&L? Do I let this person go because he's old? Or do I believe in loyalty, as worked with my grandfather, my father, etc., etc.? So these clashes inside us is the kind of polarities and contradiction and dilemmas that we have to constantly work with. And as I said, we are in the midst of two kinds of cultures that we have to manage and integrate. Anu had spoken about Atiti Devo Bhava. I spoke about Cyrus and Sikka and such clashes. You can think of many others yourself. And Aurobindo had talked about spirituality, vitality, etc., being the hallmark of what Indians are, what is Indianness. And I have, in my book, quoted many people who have looked at the whole idea of what it is to be an Indian. But I just want to end this section by saying to you that your Indianness has many aspects, of who you are. You could be a Ladakhi, you could be from Kanyakumari, you could be from Bengal, you could be a Catholic, you could be a Muslim, you could be a Sikh, you could be a vegetarian, you could be a non-vegetarian. Those are all aspects of being Indian. But eventually, it is your choice. It is your choice of what you choose that makes you an Indian. And let you not be defined by somebody else. But it is for you to define who you are as an Indian. For India and Indianness is truly about 1,000 flags flying. Is about multiplicity, is about diversity, is about each of us being, in many ways, it's our unity lies in our diversity. And so if you're looking for one line across the scatter of dots, the line of best fit, or some homogeneous articulation of what is Indianness, or to put it in some very narrow way of defining Indianness, to me, that is not Indianness. I'll stop here. Anu, are there any questions that folks may have about this particular section, Indianness, that might have come up?
I don't see any questions. As we are heading towards 7:20, I guess we can proceed further and leave it open later.
All right. Right. So now I'm going to come to my last section, which is what are the facets of the Indian leader. Now we are all in HR in this call. And let me start by saying, although for many years, I have plied my trade on competencies and traits and psychometrics and so on, I worry about the use of the word traits. The Indian leader has many facets. He is like a diamond, cut and shaped in different ways. And depending on the context, the light will shine. He will shine depending on the lens that he offers himself. He is a thali. He's garam masala of many flavors. He is a quiver full of arrows. He's a behrupya of many faces. And the best way to understand the Indian leader is that there is the Atmic self and there is the becoming based on context. There is no fix. So man is not a noun, but a working verb. For man is this and that and more. So what do I mean by that? If you were for a moment to think of this river as the Ganges, and let's say it comes from Gangotri, Then where the rocks is very steep, the water will rush if water be the human spirit. And where the banks widen, the water will widen. Where there are rocks blocking the water, it will become a rapid. If there's a big sharp gap between two rocks, it will become a waterfall, and so on. So, my view is that the Indian leader will adapt his behavior to the multiple contexts. As A.R. Ramanujan has said, we are very context specific and we constantly adapt ourselves to the environment. So, for example, if you know we say that, let's say, Isaac, you are a very nice person, very passive, not aggressive. Yes, in most situations, normal situations, yes, you are peaceful, fun loving, non aggressive. But if, let's say, bandits come in the night with weapons to harm you and your family, you are going to be very aggressive. So we are this and that depending on the situation. And which brings me to some of the Indian aspects. For example, dharma. Dharma is India's wisdom to the world. The West believes that a rule is a rule is a rule, but in dharma, we have a rule based on context. It's a principle. And depending on what station you are in, what type of hierarchy you belong to, what kind of a work you have, we have so many types of kul dharma, stations of life. We also have apadharma in times of emergencies and so on. So these are conduct depending on situations. These are eternal principles that go beyond material and earthly rules. And Mahatma Gandhi has said in one of the court cases not that I reject the British law, but I believe in a law far greater, when he referred to dharma. And it is unlike in many Abrahamic religions where there's a code of conduct, 10 commandments, how to behave. In the Indian context, the self responds to how he or she needs to act. Other concepts like ahimsa is not about, if someone slaps you, offer the other cheek, be passive. I refer to Krishna saying to Arjun, wake up and fight the just war. Or Bhishma saying to Yudhishthira, a king's duty is to go into armed combat to protect peace and justice. So ahimsa is about not causing violence, but not allowing for violence. We spoke about world is one family, Sangatan Sukta, let everyone be happy, which is ecological, and so on and so forth. So there are many such ideas that have come from the Indic wisdom. So just to end, my last slide, and what I've done so far is I have used only chapter 0 and chapter 1 of my book to explain what I've explained to you so far. Most of my book, chapter 2 onwards, chapter 3 onwards, till chapter 11, goes on to clarify this aspect of the Indian leader, which is, as a marketing jargon, I use DESI, LEADER, Desi leader. And I'll just take one to illustrate Desi. For example, Desi is D stands for directive and nurturant. And here I make the point that the Indian leader is actually dad. He is the karta. And we bring dad into the workplace. Our boss becomes dad. JPP Sinha has clarified that the nurture and task leader is the applicable model. The charismatic leader tends to get narcissistic. The laissez-faire leader tends to become an absentee landlord. Democratic leaders are considered to be weak, etc., etc. And many of the things that McClelland said, when TV Rao did work with him in India, they just were not applicable to the Indian context. And if dad becomes the karta, then the children in the office end up becoming sons and daughters, and there is sibling rivalry, politics, passive resentment, etc. And there's a whole chapter that I've written on the manovigyan of what happens in the psychology of the Indian workplace. That comes from our colonial background. It comes from aspects of our societies over the years, and this whole karta that has come from our own background and so on. There is a very strong ethnic aspect, Indian-Ness, which has a very significant play in the way in which leadership orients itself. As you know, there's a particular type of leadership that you see in the North, a very distinctive style which is there in the East or in the South, in the same country, India. And that's because of the ethnic card and the ethnic orientation, which again brings to the argument that there's regional collectivism that takes place in India. So I could go on. I'm just conscious that I said I'll end and offer time for Q&A. And there's a richness to the Q&A. And I think at this point, let me stop here and allow for questions. Yes. Anu, you want to?
Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. The audience can unmute themselves and put up questions to our speaker.
Mr. Steve, I would like to thank you for the presentation. The last part which you talked about, is it related to the situational leadership? Like leader as being a diamond, in a contextual manner we react. So is it, you are referring to or is something different, situational?
It is situational, and you'll find, Francis, that in India, 3 words are used very often. We keep saying it all depends. And the Western world get very confused with us because they have a rule-based thinking. So, if you take organizations, we constantly bring the context into play before we offer. So even something like a binary, like fudging medical bills or fudging some bills, and in some organizations simply say, look, if somebody has provided false bills, off with the head and sack the person for winter. In some organizations, they may say, no, actually she's supporting ailing parents. This was the circumstances. She's in a lower position. And certain conversations take place, and then they may end up demoting her or taking away an increment or etc. And this kind of adjustment to the context is something that is very common to us as Indians. If you're a educated person, we would be much more stringent with how you're supposed to behave. If you are not so educated and you are drunk and you misbehave, we'll say, he's like that only, and what else can you expect? Yeah. So depending on your kul or your station in life, there is a different type of a gravitas and a behavior that is expected to be displayed. And it's not universal or absolute. It's relational. Like, you're not supposed to tell secrets to X, Y, and Z, but in a family where everybody is apna, if your sister told you something, you can tell your mother or you can tell your cousin, because after all, that's not really a secret. That secret belongs to the entire family, and it's very, very relational. Am I answering your question, Francis?
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Sir, can you so I didn't get this W weird. You said no. I for independent, R for
Western,
rich,
educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
democratic. Got it. Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you, Francis. Any other questions from the audience? Steve, I have one of my own.
Please.
Most of the, the slides that you had represented was of the larger audience. Do you have something for upcoming to-be leaders that they can take away from your book?
Yeah, so Anu, there are two chapters. One is chapter 11, which is for young leaders, which is I've put that down. And there's a particular chapter on women, Women Shakti, is chapter 10. And for young leaders, I have offered, in the whole book, I've only made awareness happen. But it's only in chapter 11 that I have decided to give some advice, which I don't do in the first 10 chapters. And I have offered advice to young leaders around choice of careers, ways of thinking, some of the errors that in my own experience I've seen happen, and I've offered some guardrails and some offers and some guidance in terms of how they should perhaps navigate their careers. Sure, I don't know. There's no time on it to go into details, but it's there in the last chapter.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
One more question. If you, I think you are thoroughly studied Western, Eastern, and Indian leadership. And in your perspective, which is superior? Our Indian leadership is, having a, by far, having more values, and it's going to lead the future. Or what do you think, sir?
See, Francis, when I said Indian and Western, I'm referring to you, inside you, Francis. There's an Eastern orientation and a Western orientation. You have a Western orientation because you're English speaking. You're born in a postmodern industrialized world, and which is heavily entrenched with Western concepts, Western technology, social media, Western principles of leadership in the workplace, Western concepts of currency and world markets and democracy and capitalism, blah, blah, blah. And there's also an Eastern orientation. Yeah, you'll in the office, you will shake hands, call somebody Bob, who's 60, 55 years of age. And then you'll go across, jump on your scooter, go to a wedding and touch someone's feet. Yeah, and do namaste. So what is that? That is an orientation between Western and Eastern, which is inside you itself. So there's nothing called superior or inferior. What I said in the beginning was that a good leader is one who is able to integrate, Francis, your Westernness and your Indianness inside. So I'm also very Western. I'm a Roman Catholic. I've been brought up on Western literature, Shakespeare, music, etc., etc. I'm also an Indian. So nothing superior, or so when you're able to integrate both aspects of you, you become a successful leader. In fact, don't get into this world of superior and inferior and better or worse, because both are required. Both are like two wings of the bird. You need both the wings to fly. Yeah. What about others? They're all very quiet.
There is one more question from Isaac. And yeah, he asks, Steve, are leaders today expected to be innovators? Is that an integral quality of a leader in these times?
So innovation and creativity is something that is required at all times, right from man coming out of the caves, innovation and creativity, because if one is not a thinking mind, one is then a fossilized mind. So you require innovation and thinking for all times. And let me assure you that Indians are very good at innovation and thinking. Um, in my book, I refer to Jugaad in a nice way about the creativity, and because Indians have a lot of aspirations, very little resources, and are continuously inventing out of box solutions in order to stretch their rupee or stretch their resource. So the housewife at home, she is inventive. The person with a fixed income is very inventive. The student who goes to school is very inventive, and she doesn't have all the books. So we have learned ways to be creative and innovative. That is our DNA as Indians. Isaac, I hope that answers your question.
There's one more question.
Yeah.
What's your take on family-run businesses who still have the master-slave style of management? I guess it's very pertinent in the topic that we are talking.
See, 85% of India is family-run business. Just about 11,000 enterprises, entities are in the formal sector. The rest of India is in the informal sector. A lot of the family business have a leaning on loyalty, patriarchy, and so on and so forth. And many of the family businesses which are professional have started to move towards adopting Western practice, and ended up integrating the Western and the Indian way of thinking, and have been very successful. If you compare the multinationals and the professional family run businesses in India, and you study them over especially after liberalization of 1981, the family business, professionally run family businesses have done extremely well as compared to multinational. If you look at entrepreneurial drive and so on, and I've spoken to a lot of people who have a large canvas on India. For example, Rajiv Memani from EY was sharing that in the spotlight section, that the family business offers you entrepreneurship and lots of opportunity to grow and take risks. Whereas in many multinationals today, there is a global kitchen, and then the same kind of deployment and execution is done. And the challenges are, of course, there in India, but being a subsidiary, much of the thinking is done outside India than in India itself. And therefore, the quality of people at times in multinationals and the challenges are quite different to some of the kinds of skill sets that are there in India. And there's enough of evidence to show that Indian family businesses are getting more and more sophisticated, and are doing a damn good job.
On the topic of family businesses, I do have yet another view from what you had shared, Steve. Uh, More of the family businesses are also floundering just because the core value system gets shaken because of too much of infusion of West without knowing where to come to I would say, a consensus and a cohesiveness. Do you have any story to share for the same?
Actually, Anu, in the month of October 2021, I am now guest editing the NHRD journal, and the theme is Discover Indian-Ness and the Indian Leader. And as part of that, I am deep diving into family businesses as one of the articles, and really looking at how do you create from organizations to institutions, and what about Indian institutional processes and organizational processes need to be integrated in order to be able to create sustainability, the English word, or long-term institutional process, which is the Indian word. And so wait for that as we go through that piece. Yeah.
Sure, definitely. There is one question we would like to ask you from Isaac. Um, are leaders born or once again, I'm so sorry. Are leaders born or made? For example, someone like Gandhi, was he a born leader or circumstances made him a leader?
See, if you read the literature again, which all of the most Indian literature, most leadership literature has come from the Second World War. So there used to be one big story called the the what was that called? The great Indian. The first theory was about the great leader, which was about him being born a leader, and that has got completely thrashed. And then came many types of leadership models, situational, behavioral, and of late it is the globe studies have shown aspects of it. So I just, with my own understanding of reading through all the literature that I have, um, there are certain unique parameters for leadership orientation and thinking, which is by and large fixed. And there is a cultural kal and desh, a context, which needs to be the extra layer for the leadership to be effective. Back to the same thing, Anu, about the seed must be well placed in the right soil.
See, here's an interesting question. This is from Uman Abraham, who says, we Indians know to adapt to any situations. We are tolerant, patient, compromises, etc. Now, is this leadership or more of a survival instinct?
So you're right, Oman. I told you that we are a Berupia. A Berupia is an impersonator who come, like in the good old days, the impersonator. He'll come and an actor with many faces. So Indians have in their private space a very fixed core principles, values in their private space, very core. But in the workplace, or in India, or outside, or in parties, or in other places, they have a very adaptable nature. So we are very adaptable, both in India and when we go abroad, we are able to adapt to the context. So, you see, the good thing about India is over 7,000 years, Oman, we have been constantly assimilating syncretic tradition of many religion, rituals, many ideas from different parts of the world. We have given ideas to the world, Nalanda and so on and so forth. We have been doing trade. India is well known for its maritime prowess for many years and its military power, which is unknown to many of us. So what I want to say is that um, we have inside of the very core Indianness, which is very evident in Indians who live in India and those who live outside India as a diaspora. And we are also very adaptable. And given the kind of upbringing that we have, where every day is a tough day for most people, competitive exam, taking the bus, the weather, the challenges of infrastructure, the ambiguity, we have learned to become adaptive, resilient, tough, and challenging. So, at one level, it is, if you want to call it survival, yes, because we have come from an agrarian background, but that has made us better. And please remember one more thing, that up until for last only 300 years or 200 years, India has gone down in GDP. But China and India were the two richest countries in the world for the last 7,000 years, except for the time when we were under the colonial period. So we are a resurgent nation, And today, much of the inferiority that we have swallowed from our colonial past has now gone, and there is now a kind of a pride of Indianness. And so we now bring that extension to many of the kinds of phenomena that you're seeing in playing itself out in modern day politics and modern day economy and modern day orientation, which is a symptom of the Indian pride. Hope I've answered your question, Oman.
I want to extend some more. In fact, you gave that colonial perspectives and why we behave so. I don't know whether it's an excuse from Indians, like, no, we compromise a lot. And now I see that a lot of youngsters, the next generation, they stand for certain principles. In fact, if they want something, they fight for it. But we used to say that, no, we have high respect for elders and all that. Maybe that is that master slave, as Mr. Gonsalves said. We were under colonial rule, and we were told to behave the rules, authority, hierarchy, elders, and so on. I do not know. But when we read that old traditional books, again, we had all these things, like, respect for everything was there. But if you look at the 2-3 generation past, our own leaders were fought for things. They stood for principles. In between, we compromised a lot, I think. That's my...
Oman, I'm very sad to tell you that our history as we know it today is distorted and written by foreigners with ethnocentric lenses. And things like, many things have been confused, like race. Karma has been taken as destiny, and a lot of distortions because what's not understood is written in an heterocentric way. I wish history was written the correct way. I mean, in fact, the next book I write will be on history because, and today many Indians, sad to say, don't know Indian-Ness because they haven't read Indian-Ness, except for watching of Doordarshan and some Mahabharata or Ramayana or some, Amar Chitra Khatha. There is very little understanding of even our own Indic wisdom to start with. But whether it's an excuse, not at all. For example, the color black was a very auspicious color. Most of the gods and goddesses, Krishna, Ram, Draupadi, many others, were all dark males and females. But why do we now go and do fair and lovely cream? From where did we learn this? That fair and lovely. The reality is that we have picked up inferiority. We have picked up, some of the systems that we have of master and servant. Today, the ICS and the IAS and the Indian bureaucracy has borrowed from a machinery, an administration system, which is meant to perpetuate master and servant. So when some politician becomes, Raja, so we all, think of him as not in service of the public, but he's actually the ruler of the place. So the point is illiteracy and ignorance on some of our parts, and I think we have to remember that much of our thinking has happened because of a certain context in which we have come in from. And it's important to become aware of what we have been going through. And through reading, and there's a certain slant in the way history is currently written. And we therefore need to, at least, women, if you have learned, I remember back when I was in school, we used to learn that, some people had come from other countries. And that's how the Mohenjo-daro and Harappa had taken place. The reality is today, scientists have come up with the clear fact that Mohenjo-daro and Harappa existed before any invasion, or what is the sub-Sindhu theory and so on. So Elphinstone, Mills, Max Muller, many of these people wrote history in a way that suited their colonial purpose. Enough said.
Thank you. And looking forward for your next book too.
I guess one of them have asked, where do you get the book?
Just type The Indian Boss at Work, Amazon, and you can buy a Kindle version for I think 300 rupees or 280, a cup of coffee. Or please buy a hardbound copy because you will want to make notes. There are about some 700 to 800 citations in the book. And those citations are very exciting doors to further exploration. So you will want to go into those explorations. Whatever I have understood, I have offered you keys to greater adventure. But please get a hardbound, go through it, and discover your own personal leadership. If you don't mind, we are at 7:55. Could you just give me some feedback on the chat? 1 word, 2 words as to how you experience the webinar. So it's some feedback for me.
If any of you would like to unmute, please do so.
Sir, it is very, very insightful, sir. Actually, the way you presented, very, very systematically, and I could feel that you have confidence, authority over the subject. So in a phased manner, without not any different. You are very cool and composed and delivered the concept in a very nice way. I got because I had a 2 or 3 presentation. One is Oracle, another one is with another guy was talking about yoga, and so I jumped all the sessions and I came here. And I got fully engrossed in this. I really appreciate it. Commendable, very commendable, and very insightful also. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Listen, I just discovered in the last 10 years many of the things, and I, as part of writing the book, I am on a mission to share about Indian-Ness and Indian leadership to as many people. So my talks are free. So if there are any groups of people that want to listen in, please have them invite me. I would love to disseminate more on this subject. Yeah.
Steve, I hope you're reading the chat.
Yes, I am. And there's some lovely feedback. Somebody said interesting and a bit mystical.
Mystical, exactly.
I say one of the things about mystical is spiritual. Under Desi leader DESI, one of the strong strengths of India is our spiritual quotient. You would have seen in my own conversation last 90 minutes, I've often used a lot of spiritual words. Yeah. And that is also our biggest strength that Aurobindo talked about.
So on behalf of NHRD Chennai chapter and everybody who has attended the session today, thank you so much, Steve, because this is a very different, I would say, very different kind of a session from what we are used to. And it was more like conversation, and that is something that we all of us enjoyed here. So I am sure each one of you will agree with me. So hearing from you, hearing your insights, throws a lot of questions that we can then contemplate. The Nidhi Dhyana, I hope I'm reading
Manana.
Yeah, not just the banana, but also the contemplation part of it. I hope it will really help all of us, and for which you have opened the session, the way to thinking with the right kind of questions. So my thanks to you personally, as well as from on behalf of NHRD Chennai chapter. It was a lovely session, and have a great evening, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Cheers.
We'll be